The morning of July 5, 1943, broke gray and humid across the rolling steppes of the Kursk salient, where Hauptmann Friedrich Weber of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich crouched in the commander's cupola of his Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger I, adjusting his Zeiss binoculars while scanning the Soviet defensive positions that stretched like an endless maze of trenches, bunkers, and anti-tank obstacles across the wheat fields of central Russia. At 28, Weber had been commanding panzer units for 22 months across the length of the Eastern Front, from the initial triumph of Operation Barbarossa to the desperate winter retreats that had characterized German operations since Stalingrad, but nothing in his extensive combat experience had prepared him for the magnitude of Soviet defensive preparations that Operation Citadel was about to encounter. The Kursk salient represented the largest remaining Soviet bulge in German lines following the winter campaigns of 1942–43, extending 200 kilometers into Wehrmacht-controlled territory while threatening the flanks of Army Group Center and Army Group South. Adolf Hitler had ordered Operation Citadel to eliminate this strategic liability through simultaneous attacks by Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge's Army Group Center from the north and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group South from the south, creating a massive double envelopment that would trap over 1 million Red Army troops while restoring German strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. Weber's Tiger I tank formed part of the 2 SS Panzer Corps spearhead under SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, assigned to break through Soviet defensive lines south of Kursk while advancing toward the town of Prokhorovka. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich represented one of 3 elite Waffen-SS formations committed to Operation Citadel, equipped with the most advanced German armor including Tiger I heavy tanks, Panther medium tanks, and Ferdinand tank destroyers. The systematic concentration of Germany's most experienced armored units reflected recognition that Kursk would determine the course of the Eastern Front campaign. The strategic importance of Operation Citadel extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations to encompass German efforts to regain the initiative after 18 months of increasingly desperate defensive operations. The Wehrmacht's failure at Stalingrad had demonstrated Soviet resilience and growing military competence, while the systematic Red Army advance during the winter of 1942–43 had eliminated many of Germany's most experienced divisions. Hitler viewed Kursk as the final opportunity to achieve decisive victory in the east before American and British forces opened the Second Front that would stretch German resources beyond sustainable limits. Weber's Tiger I tank, bearing the tactical number 231, represented the pinnacle of German armored technology in 1943, mounting an 88mm KWK-36 gun capable of destroying any Soviet tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The 57-ton vehicle provided exceptional protection through armor plates ranging from 25mm to 100mm thickness, while its Maybach HL-230 engine delivered sufficient power for tactical mobility despite the tank's massive weight. However, the Tiger's mechanical complexity and fuel consumption created logistics challenges that limited its operational effectiveness during sustained combat operations. The Soviet defenders facing Operation Citadel had spent 3 months constructing the most elaborate defensive system in military history, incorporating 8 successive defensive belts that extended 175 kilometers in depth throughout the Kursk salient. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, coordinating the Red Army's defensive preparations, had positioned over 13 million troops supported by 3,600 tanks, 20,000 artillery pieces, and extensive minefields designed to channel German attacks into predetermined killing zones. The systematic Soviet preparation represented a fundamental evolution in Red Army capabilities since the disasters of 1941. Oberst Sylvester Stadler commanded the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich during the final preparations for Operation Citadel, briefing his subordinate commanders on the tactical plan that called for breakthrough operations against the Soviet 6th Guards Army positions near Belgorod. Stadler was a veteran Waffen-SS officer who had led armored formations throughout the Eastern Front campaign, accumulating extensive experience in breakthrough operations and mobile warfare. His professional assessment suggested that Operation Citadel faced significantly more formidable defensive preparations than previous German offensives had encountered. The morning briefing at 0430 hours on July 5 revealed the magnitude of the tactical challenge facing the 2 SS Panzer Corps, as intelligence officers outlined Soviet defensive dispositions that included over 40,000 mines per kilometer of front, interconnected anti-tank strongpoints, and carefully positioned artillery concentrations designed to disrupt German armored formations. The briefing emphasized that German success depended on maintaining tactical momentum, while avoiding prolonged engagements that would enable Soviet reserves to reinforce threatened sectors. Unterscharfer Hans Müller served as Weber's gunner, operating the Tiger's 88mm main gun with precision developed through 18 months of combat against Soviet armor. Müller was a veteran tank crewman who had participated in armored operations from the initial advances toward Moscow through the defensive battles that followed Stalingrad, accumulating technical expertise that made him invaluable for engaging targets at maximum effective range. His combat experience suggested that Soviet anti-tank capabilities had improved dramatically since the early phases of the Eastern Front campaign. The preliminary artillery bombardment commenced at 0530 hours with systematic fires delivered by over 10,000 German guns and mortars concentrated against identified Soviet positions throughout the southern sector of the Kursk salient. The barrage included high-explosive shells, armor-piercing rounds, and chemical munitions designed to neutralize Soviet defensive positions while creating gaps for armored exploitation. Weber observed the bombardment effects through his commander's periscope, noting that Soviet positions had been constructed to withstand heavy artillery fire through deep underground construction and reinforced overhead protection. General der Panzertruppe Hermann Hoth commanded the 4th Panzer Army during Operation Citadel's southern attack, coordinating breakthrough operations by 3 Panzer Corps totaling over 1,500 tanks and assault guns. Hoth was an experienced armor commander who had led panzer formations during the successful campaigns in France and the initial phases of Operation Barbarossa, developing tactical expertise in mobile warfare and breakthrough operations. His professional knowledge suggested that Operation Citadel required achieving rapid penetration before Soviet reserves could be committed to contain German advances. The German tactical plan for Operation Citadel emphasized concentrated armored thrusts supported by close air support from the Luftwaffe's remaining Eastern Front forces, including Henschel HS-129 tank destroyers and Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers equipped with 37mm anti-tank guns. The systematic coordination between ground and air forces represented German recognition that breakthrough operations required overwhelming local superiority to penetrate Soviet defensive systems that had been designed specifically to counter Wehrmacht tactical procedures. Weber's Tiger I advanced toward the Soviet main defensive line at 0630 hours as part of a company-strength formation that included 12 heavy tanks supported by Panzer IV medium tanks and Stu-G 3 assault guns from the division's Panzer Regiment. The German armor moved in tactical formation through terrain that had been systematically prepared by Soviet engineers to channel attacks into predetermined killing zones covered by anti-tank guns, mines, and artillery concentrations. The first indication of Soviet defensive strength came at 0645 hours when concealed anti-tank guns opened fire on the advancing German armor from camouflage positions that had not been detected during reconnaissance operations. The Soviet 762mm Zeiss 3 anti-tank guns and 45mm Model 1942 weapons engaged German tanks at ranges between 800 and 1,200 meters, demonstrating improved gunnery techniques and systematic defensive coordination that exceeded previous Red Army performance. Oberscharfer Klaus Becker commanded Weber's Tiger tank as driver, maneuvering the massive vehicle through terrain obstacles while avoiding anti-tank fire directed with increasing accuracy by Soviet gunners. Becker was an experienced panzer driver who understood the Tiger's handling characteristics and mechanical limitations, enabling effective tactical movement despite the tank's weight and complexity. His technical expertise proved crucial for maintaining mobility during close-range engagements with Soviet defensive positions. The German advance encountered the first major obstacle at 0700 hours when the 2 SS Panzer Corps reached extensive minefields that had been laid systematically across all likely approach routes toward Soviet defensive positions. The mines included anti-tank devices capable of destroying or immobilizing heavy tanks, while anti-personnel mines threatened German engineers attempting to clear passages for armored formations. Weber observed pioneer units working under fire to create lanes through the defensive obstacles while Soviet artillery delivered precision fires against the vulnerable clearance operations. Soviet defensive tactics at Kursk reflected 18 months of tactical evolution since the initial German invasion, incorporating lessons learned from previous Wehrmacht breakthrough operations while exploiting German tactical predictability. The Red Army had studied German armored procedures extensively, developing countermeasures that addressed panzer formations' reliance on concentrated attacks along narrow frontages. The systematic Soviet preparation created tactical conditions that negated many traditional German armored advantages. Sturmbannführer Joachim Paper led the advanced battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler during the initial breakthrough attempts, coordinating attacks by Tiger I tanks, Panther medium tanks, and mechanized infantry against Soviet strongpoints that demonstrated exceptional defensive preparation. Paper was an experienced Waffen-SS officer who had participated in armored operations throughout the Eastern Front, accumulating tactical knowledge that enabled recognition of improved Soviet capabilities. Weber's Tiger I engaged its first target at 0715 hours when a concealed Soviet T-34/76 medium tank opened fire from a hull-down position approximately 1,400 meters distant. Mueller's 88 mm gun destroyed the Soviet tank with a single armor-piercing round that penetrated the T-34's frontal armor, but the engagement revealed Soviet tactical improvements that included better camouflage, improved positioning, and coordination with supporting anti-tank weapons. The systematic nature of Soviet defensive preparation exceeded German intelligence estimates based on previous operations. The breakthrough phase of Operation Citadel continued throughout the morning as German armored formations advanced through successive Soviet defensive lines, while suffering increasing casualties from anti-tank fire, mines, and artillery concentrations. The 4th Panzer Army achieved limited tactical success by penetrating approximately 15 kilometers into Soviet defensive positions, but the rate of advance fell far short of operational requirements for achieving breakthrough before Soviet reserves could be committed. General Nikolai Vatutin commanded the Voronezh Front, defending the southern sector of the Kursk salient, coordinating defensive operations by 5 combined arms armies supported by extensive artillery and engineering preparations. Vatutin was an experienced Red Army commander who had participated in successful defensive operations at Moscow and Stalingrad, developing expertise in coordinated defense that maximized the effectiveness of prepared positions while conserving forces for counterattack operations. The systematic Soviet defensive coordination included precise artillery fires directed against German armored formations by forward observers positioned throughout the defensive zone, while close air support from Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik aircraft provided additional firepower against advancing panzer units. The integration of different combat arms demonstrated Red Army tactical development that had evolved significantly since the early phases of the Eastern Front campaign. Weber observed the gradual attrition of German armored strength throughout the first day of Operation Citadel, as mechanical breakdowns, combat losses, and fuel consumption reduced the 2 SS Panzer Corps' combat effectiveness while Soviet defensive capabilities remained largely intact. His Tiger I had expended over half its ammunition load without achieving significant tactical progress, while reconnaissance reports indicated that Soviet reserves were moving toward the battle area to reinforce threatened defensive sectors. The tactical situation facing German forces at the end of the first day reflected fundamental problems with Operation Citadel's conception and execution, as Wehrmacht units had achieved only limited penetrations against defensive systems that had been specifically designed to counter German armored tactics. The systematic Soviet preparation had created conditions that favored defensive operations while negating German advantages in individual tank performance and crew training. SS Oberfuhrer Fritz Witt commanded the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler during the second day of Operation Citadel, attempting to exploit limited breakthrough success achieved during the initial assault while facing increasing Soviet resistance and counterattack operations. Witt was a veteran Waffen-SS commander who had led the division through previous Eastern Front operations, but his tactical assessment suggested that Operation Citadel was encountering defensive preparations that exceeded German capabilities for sustained breakthrough operations. The second day of Operation Citadel, July 6th, began with concentrated German attacks against Soviet defensive positions that had been reinforced during the night by reserve units and additional anti-tank weapons. Weber's Tiger I participated in company-strength assaults that achieved tactical success in penetrating individual strongpoints, but the systematic nature of Soviet defensive preparation prevented exploitation of local victories into operational breakthrough. Major Ivan Cherniakovsky commanded the 60th Army defending critical sectors of the Kursk salient's southern face, coordinating defensive operations that demonstrated improved Red Army tactical competence while inflicting maximum casualties on attacking German forces. Cherniakovsky was an experienced Soviet commander who had distinguished himself during previous defensive operations, developing expertise in coordinated defense that exploited German tactical predictability while conserving forces for eventual counterattack. Weber's combat experience during the second day of Operation Citadel confirmed his growing recognition that German forces faced defensive preparations that exceeded their capabilities for achieving decisive breakthrough. The systematic Soviet resistance included coordinated anti-tank fires, precisely timed counterattacks, and defensive coordination that prevented German exploitation of individual tactical successes. His professional assessment suggested that Operation Citadel was developing into a battle of attrition that favored Soviet numerical superiority. The appearance of new Soviet tank designs during the second day of fighting provided additional evidence of Red Army technical and tactical evolution since Stalingrad. Weber observed T-34/85 medium tanks and Su-152 self-propelled guns that demonstrated improved armor protection and firepower compared to previous Soviet equipment, while their tactical employment reflected enhanced crew training and coordination procedures. Oberst Hyacinth Graf Strachwitz commanded the Panzer Regiment of the 1st Panzer Division during Operation Citadel's southern attack, leading Tiger I and Panther tanks in breakthrough attempts that achieved limited tactical success while suffering increasing losses to Soviet anti-tank defenses. Strachwitz was one of Germany's most experienced tank commanders, having participated in armored operations since the Polish campaign, but his tactical knowledge suggested that Operation Citadel faced defensive preparations that had been specifically designed to counter German armored tactics. The third day of Operation Citadel, July 7th, witnessed the first major Soviet counterattacks as reserve formations launched coordinated assaults against German spearheads that had penetrated deepest into the defensive system. Weber's Tiger I engaged multiple Soviet tanks during these counterattacks, demonstrating the technical superiority of German heavy tanks while also revealing the improved tactical competence of Red Army armored units. Colonel General Pavel Rotmistrov commanded the 5th Guards Tank Army, which had been held in reserve during the initial phases of Operation Citadel before being committed to counterattack operations against the 2 SS Panzer Corps near Prokhorovka. Rotmistrov was an experienced Soviet tank commander who had participated in armored operations at Moscow and Stalingrad, developing tactical expertise that enabled effective employment of large armored formations against German panzer units. The systematic Soviet counterattacks during July 7th demonstrated Red Army tactical capabilities that exceeded German expectations based on previous Eastern Front experience. The coordinated employment of tank formations, artillery support, and close air support reflected improved Soviet doctrine that had been developed through analysis of German tactical procedures and 18 months of combat experience against Wehrmacht forces. Weber participated in defensive operations during the Soviet counterattacks, using his Tiger I's superior armor and firepower to engage attacking T-34 tanks while coordinating with supporting German units to maintain tactical coherence. The engagement demonstrated individual German technical and tactical superiority, while also revealing the mathematical advantages held by Soviet forces that could sustain higher loss rates while maintaining operational pressure. The fourth day of Operation Citadel marked the beginning of German recognition that breakthrough operations were unlikely to achieve strategic objectives within acceptable loss limits. Weber observed the systematic attrition of German armored strength as combat losses, mechanical failures, and ammunition consumption reduced the 2 SS Panzer Corps' combat effectiveness to levels that prevented continued offensive operations. General der Panzertruppe Hermann Braith commanded the 3 Panzer Corps during Operation Citadel's southern attack, coordinating breakthrough attempts that achieved tactical success in penetrating Soviet defensive lines while failing to achieve operational breakthrough due to the depth and systematic nature of Red Army defensive preparation. Braith's professional assessment indicated that German forces lacked sufficient strength to overcome Soviet defensive advantages through conventional armored tactics. The systematic nature of Soviet defensive success during the first week of Operation Citadel reflected fundamental changes in Red Army capabilities that had occurred since the disasters of 1941. The coordinated employment of different combat arms, improved technical performance of Soviet equipment, and enhanced tactical competence of individual units demonstrated military evolution that enabled effective resistance against German armored formations. Weber's Tiger I required major maintenance after 5 days of continuous combat operations, reflecting the mechanical complexity and reliability problems that limited German heavy tank effectiveness during sustained operations. The systematic breakdown of German armored equipment contrasted with improved Soviet maintenance and logistics that enabled continued operations despite heavy combat losses. The Battle of Prokhorovka on July 12 represented the climactic engagement of Operation Citadel, with over 1,500 tanks engaged in the largest armored battle in military history. Weber commanded his Tiger I during this engagement, participating in close-range tank combat that demonstrated both German technical superiority and Soviet numerical advantages in determining battle outcomes. SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser coordinated two SS Panzer Corps operations during the Battle of Prokhorovka, attempting to achieve breakthrough against massed Soviet armor while maintaining tactical coherence among his three Waffen-SS divisions. Hauser was an experienced corps commander who understood the tactical requirements for successful armored operations, but his professional assessment suggested that German forces faced overwhelming numerical disadvantages that prevented decisive victory. The tactical results of the Battle of Prokhorovka confirmed Weber's growing recognition that Operation Citadel could not achieve strategic objectives despite individual German tactical successes. The systematic Soviet commitment of reserve forces had created tactical conditions that favored defensive operations while preventing German exploitation of technical advantages in individual combat systems. Colonel General Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army demonstrated improved Soviet tactical capabilities during the Battle of Prokhorovka, employing coordinated tank attacks that accepted heavy losses while preventing German breakthrough operations. The Red Army's willingness to sustain casualties reflected strategic recognition that preventing German victory was more important than minimizing immediate tactical losses. Weber observed the systematic destruction of German offensive capability during the Battle of Prokhorovka, as combat losses eliminated experienced tank crews while mechanical failures reduced available armor to levels that prevented continued offensive operations. His Tiger I survived the engagement but required extensive repairs that highlighted the logistical challenges facing German armored units during sustained combat operations. The strategic implications of Operation Citadel's failure extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations to influence the broader course of the Eastern Front campaign. The German inability to achieve breakthrough at Kursk demonstrated that Wehrmacht forces lacked sufficient strength to conduct successful offensive operations against prepared Soviet defenses, while Red Army defensive success validated tactical improvements that had been developed since Stalingrad. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, observed Operation Citadel's development with growing concern about German armored doctrine and equipment employment. Guderian recognized that the systematic attrition of experienced panzer units during unsuccessful offensive operations was eliminating irreplaceable expertise while failing to achieve strategic objectives that justified the tactical costs. The cancellation of Operation Citadel on July 13 reflected Hitler's recognition that continued offensive operations would eliminate German strategic reserves without achieving breakthrough success. Weber participated in the systematic German withdrawal from advanced positions near Prokhorovka, conducting defensive operations that preserved remaining German armor while acknowledging the failure of Germany's final major offensive on the Eastern Front. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein attempted to continue Operation Citadel's southern attack despite Hitler's cancellation order, recognizing that German forces had achieved significant tactical success that could potentially be exploited into operational breakthrough. However, the systematic Soviet defensive success had eliminated German offensive capability while demonstrating Red Army improvements that made future Wehrmacht defensive operations increasingly difficult. Weber's participation in the withdrawal phase of Operation Citadel confirmed his assessment that German forces faced fundamental changes in the Eastern Front's tactical balance. The systematic Soviet defensive success had demonstrated Red Army capabilities that exceeded German intelligence estimates while revealing Wehrmacht limitations that would influence all subsequent operations against Soviet forces. The human cost of Operation Citadel included approximately 200,000 German casualties during 2 weeks of offensive operations, representing the systematic elimination of experienced personnel who could not be replaced through existing training programs. Weber observed the individual tragedies that comprised these statistics, noting the loss of skilled tank commanders, experienced gunners, and veteran mechanics whose expertise had been accumulated through 3 years of Eastern Front combat. Rottenführer Johann Schmidt served as Weber's radio operator during Operation Citadel, maintaining communication with higher headquarters while coordinating tactical operations with supporting German units. Schmidt was a veteran tank crewman who had served with the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich since its formation, accumulating technical expertise and combat experience that made him invaluable for complex operations. His survival throughout Operation Citadel reflected both individual skill and the superior protection provided by Tiger I armor. The tactical lessons learned during Operation Citadel influenced German defensive doctrine for the remainder of the Eastern Front campaign, emphasizing the importance of mobile defense and strategic withdrawal rather than fixed-position warfare. Weber's combat experience contributed to revised training programs that addressed Soviet tactical improvements while recognizing German limitations in conducting offensive operations against prepared defensive positions. The strategic consequences of Operation Citadel's failure enabled the Red Army to launch major offensive operations that systematically eliminated German defensive positions throughout the central and southern sectors of the Eastern Front. The Battle of Kursk marked the permanent shift of strategic initiative to Soviet forces while demonstrating Wehrmacht inability to conduct successful large-scale offensive operations against improved Red Army capabilities. Soviet industrial production during 1943 exceeded German manufacturing in every category of military equipment, enabling the Red Army to sustain higher loss rates while maintaining numerical superiority over German forces. Weber observed the practical effects of this industrial disparity through encounters with new Soviet equipment that demonstrated technical improvements and manufacturing quality that approached or exceeded German standards. The Luftwaffe's inability to achieve air superiority over the Kursk battlefield reflected the systematic attrition of German air power that had occurred during 2 years of Eastern Front operations. Weber observed Soviet close air support operations that faced minimal interference from German fighters, enabling coordinated air-ground attacks that disrupted German tactical operations while supporting Red Army defensive efforts. General Walter Model commanded the Ninth Army during Operation Citadel's northern attack, achieving limited tactical success against Soviet defensive positions while facing the same systematic defensive preparation that characterized Red Army positions throughout the Kursk salient. Model's professional assessment confirmed that Soviet defensive capabilities had evolved beyond German tactical countermeasures, requiring fundamental changes in Wehrmacht operational doctrine. The intelligence failure that contributed to Operation Citadel's unsuccessful outcome reflected broader problems in German strategic assessment and operational planning during 1943. The systematic underestimation of Soviet defensive capabilities combined with overconfidence in German technical superiority created conditions that enabled Red Army success despite apparent German advantages in individual combat systems and tactical procedures. Weber's recognition that the Wehrmacht was finished when he observed the systematic coordination of Soviet anti-tank defenses at Kursk proved accurate, as German forces never again achieved strategic offensive success against Red Army positions. His professional assessment reflected combat experience that enabled realistic evaluation of tactical situations despite political pressure for continued offensive operations. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's coordination of Soviet defensive operations at Kursk demonstrated Red Army tactical and operational competence that had evolved from the disasters of 1941 into professional military capability that exceeded German defensive planning. The systematic Soviet success validated 18 months of tactical development while confirming the fundamental shift in Eastern Front military capabilities. The logistics challenges facing German forces during Operation Citadel reflected broader problems with Wehrmacht supply systems that had been strained beyond capacity by 3 years of continuous operations across multiple theaters. Weber observed the practical effects of fuel shortages, ammunition rationing, and spare parts limitations that reduced German combat effectiveness while Soviet logistics demonstrated improved efficiency and reliability. Colonel General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army achieved the deepest penetration during Operation Citadel's southern attack, advancing approximately 35 kilometers into Soviet defensive positions before being halted by systematic Red Army resistance. The tactical success represented significant German capabilities while also demonstrating the limitations that prevented exploitation of breakthrough opportunities into operational victory. The Battle of Kursk established tactical precedents that influenced armored warfare development throughout the remainder of World War II and subsequent military operations. Weber's combat experience contributed to improved understanding of tank versus tank engagements, anti-tank defense coordination, and the integration of different combat arms in modern warfare. The systematic Soviet defensive success at Kursk enabled subsequent Red Army offensive operations that systematically eliminated German defensive positions throughout Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. The strategic momentum gained during the successful defense created conditions that enabled continued Soviet advances toward Berlin, while demonstrating Red Army operational capabilities that exceeded German defensive resources. Weber continued serving with the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich throughout the systematic German retreat from Soviet territory, participating in defensive operations that demonstrated individual German tactical competence, while acknowledging the fundamental shift in strategic circumstances. His survival of Operation Citadel enabled continued service during the final phases of the Eastern Front campaign, providing leadership and expertise that helped preserve German units during increasingly desperate defensive operations. The technological lessons learned during Operation Citadel influenced German tank design and production for the remainder of the war, emphasizing reliability and ease of maintenance rather than maximum performance characteristics. The Tiger I's mechanical complexity and high production costs had proven problematic during sustained combat operations, leading to revised specifications that prioritized practical battlefield effectiveness over theoretical technical superiority. Field Marshal Walter Model's subsequent appointment as commander of Army Group Center reflected recognition that defensive expertise would be more valuable than offensive capability during the remainder of the Eastern Front campaign. Model's tactical competence in conducting mobile defense operations had been demonstrated during Operation Citadel's northern attack, validating defensive doctrine that would characterize German operations until the end of the war. The human dimension of Operation Citadel extended beyond military considerations to encompass the psychological impact on German and Soviet forces who recognized the battle's decisive importance for determining the war's ultimate outcome. Weber observed the individual courage and professional competence displayed by soldiers on both sides while acknowledging that mathematical advantages in personnel and equipment would ultimately determine strategic success. The strategic implications of the Battle of Kursk influenced Allied planning for operations in Western Europe, as the demonstrated German inability to achieve offensive success against prepared Soviet defenses validated plans for the Normandy invasion and subsequent operations toward Berlin. The systematic Wehrmacht failure at Kursk confirmed that German strategic reserves had been eliminated while demonstrating Soviet capabilities that would prove decisive during the war's final phases. Soviet military doctrine after Kursk emphasized the integration of different combat arms and the systematic coordination of offensive operations that would characterize Red Army advances during 1944 and 1945. The defensive success at Kursk validated tactical improvements while providing experience that enabled subsequent offensive operations of unprecedented scale and effectiveness. Weber's post-war reflection on Operation Citadel acknowledged that German tactical competence and individual heroism could not overcome the systematic advantages held by Soviet forces in industrial production, manpower resources, and strategic planning. The Battle of Kursk represented the culmination of tactical evolution that had transformed the Red Army from the disorganized force of 1941 into a professional military organization capable of defeating experienced German formations. The legacy of Operation Citadel extended beyond immediate military considerations to influence post-war analysis of armored warfare, defensive operations, and the relationship between tactical success and strategic victory. Weber's combat experience contributed to improved understanding of modern warfare requirements, while demonstrating the continued importance of individual competence and professional military skill despite overwhelming systemic disadvantages. The morning of July 5, 1943, when Weber first observed the systematic coordination of Soviet anti-tank defenses at Kursk, marked the beginning of Germany's irreversible strategic decline on the Eastern Front. The mathematical precision of Red Army defensive preparation and the systematic failure of German breakthrough attempts confirmed that Wehrmacht forces lacked sufficient strength to achieve strategic objectives against improved Soviet capabilities. The Battle of Kursk demonstrated that individual courage, technical superiority, and professional competence could not overcome systematic disadvantages in industrial capacity, manpower resources, and strategic planning that characterized German military operations during the war's later phases. Weber's recognition that the Wehrmacht was finished reflected accurate assessment of military realities despite political pressure for unrealistic optimism about German capabilities. The strategic consequences of Operation Citadel's failure ensured Soviet strategic dominance on the Eastern Front while eliminating German offensive capability permanently. The systematic Red Army success validated 18 months of tactical development while demonstrating military evolution that would prove decisive during subsequent operations toward Berlin and the ultimate Allied victory in Europe. Weber's survival of the Battle of Kursk enabled him to witness the systematic collapse of German resistance throughout the Eastern Front during the war's final phases. His combat experience provided perspective on the military transformation that had occurred during 4 years of warfare, while his observations documented the human dimension of strategic defeat that transcended tactical considerations and individual heroism. The mathematical realities of modern warfare had ultimately determined the outcome at Kursk, despite individual German advantages in tactical competence and equipment performance. Weber's professional assessment that the Wehrmacht was finished when he observed Soviet defensive coordination proved accurate, as subsequent events confirmed the fundamental shift in military capabilities that would determine the war's conclusion.